She was a top heart surgeon. He was a billionaire CEO she once loved and left without a word. 5 years later, she returns, desperate to save her father's life, and is forced into a 1-year marriage contract to do it. But what begins as a cold, calculated deal unravels into a storm of secrets, betrayal, and a love neither ever truly let go. Ava Reynolds thought she walked away forever, but fate had other plans. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that touch the soul. The city hadn't changed, not really. The skyscrapers still stabbed into the clouds with the same ruthless ambition. The morning streets buzzed with suits and coffee cups and the constant thrum of wanting more. But as Dr. Ava Reynolds stood in front of the polished glass entrance to Whitmore Holdings, she realized something inside her had. She wasn't the same woman who once kissed a man on the top floor and whispered dreams between midnight sheets. Now she stood here wearing a navy blue business dress instead of scrubs, her hands cold against the soft leather of the folder she clutched, filled with desperation dressed as data. Her chest tightened. This wasn't a hospital. There were no heart monitors, no smell of antiseptic, no rhythm of hope thrumming beneath gloved fingers. Only this tower, cold, sharp, impersonal, built by the man she once loved. And now she had to walk straight into his world and ask him for help. 5 years ago, she had walked away, left without a word, without closure. Logan Whitmore had once been her future, and she had thrown it all away to protect what little remained of her family's legacy. Back then, she thought she could carry the cost of that silence. But today, the weight of it threatened to crush her. Her father was dying. His heart was failing, ironic, considering he had spent his life building one of the most respected cardiac institutions on the East Coast. Reynolds Heart Institute had once been a beacon. Now it was barely treading water, drowning in lawsuits, rising debt, and administrative chaos. The board had begged her to reach out. She was the only one with ties to Logan, the only one who could secure the financial lifeline they needed. And the truth was, she didn't have a choice. If she waited, her father would be dead within months. The hospital would follow. Ava exhaled, pressing her hand to the steel door. Her reflection stared back at her, tired but composed. Then she stepped in. The lobby was sleek and silent, a marble cavern wrapped in gold accents. A young receptionist greeted her with robotic politeness. "Dr. Reynolds, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. Top floor." Her heart stuttered. She hadn't expected that. The elevator opened with a soft chime, and she stepped inside. The doors closed like a vault sealing her fate. As the elevator ascended, the numbers blinked higher. 20, 25, 30, each one echoing with the beat of her own pulse. Her grip tightened on the folder. She tried to steady her breath, but her chest was a storm. When the doors opened, she was greeted by a woman with a severe bun and sharper eyes, Logan's longtime assistant, Diana. "Follow me," Diana said flatly, turning before Ava could respond. The hallway was lined with abstract art and silence. They stopped in front of a massive walnut door. "He's waiting." The door creaked open. Ava stepped inside. Logan sat behind a sleek desk, backlit by a wall of windows that drenched the room in golden light. He didn't look up. For a second, she thought maybe he hadn't heard her. Then he spoke. "Dr. Ava Reynolds," he said slowly, the name rolling off his tongue like something he hadn't tasted in years. "Didn't think I'd ever see you here again." His voice hadn't changed. Still deep, still controlled, but now laced with something colder. He finally looked up, and when their eyes met, it felt like time bent just enough to hurt. Ava stood her ground, spine straight though her legs trembled slightly. "I didn't come for myself," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I came for my father, for Reynolds Heart Institute. We need help." Logan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "And why would I help you after what you did?" His eyes cut through her. Ava's lips parted, but she said nothing. 5 years ago, she had disappeared without explanation. Because Victoria Whitmore, Logan's mother, had backed her into a corner. She had threatened to destroy Ava's father, revoke her license, and smear the family name. She had burned the letter Ava wrote to Logan before her eyes. And so, Ava left. But Logan never knew that. And even now, she wasn't sure he would believe it. She met his gaze. "Because you can. This isn't a plea, it's a proposal, a solid investment opportunity." If you want numbers, projections, a full restructure plan, I have it all right here. Logan laughed, a short, humorless sound. You always were good at dressing things up in logic. He stood, walking toward her slowly. But I don't buy pretty speeches. He stopped a foot away from her, close enough for her to smell the faint scent of cedar and whiskey, so familiar it made her ache. I'll help, he said, voice low, but I want something in return. Ava's heart sank. She stepped back slightly. What is your price? He didn't blink. 1 year. You'll be my wife, on paper, and you'll give me a child. The words hit her like a slap. You're not serious, she whispered. He stepped closer. I need stability. After last year's board revolt, I need to show the world I'm grounded. A wife, a child, a perfect image. Ava felt like she couldn't breathe. Every part of her screamed no. She was a surgeon. She preserved life. She fought for dignity, for autonomy. She wouldn't trade her body like a business transaction. But then, her father's eyes in that hospital bed. The weight of the hospital staff depending on her. The patients who needed that place to survive. She turned to the window. Below, the city glittered like a world she no longer belonged to. When she turned back, her voice was sharp. I have conditions. Logan raised an eyebrow. Go on. After 1 year, I walk away. No strings. If I choose, I retain custody. And you don't just save Reynolds, you restructure it. Fully. Transparently. A flicker of something almost like admiration crossed his face. You still know how to play hardball. He returned to his desk, pulled out a file. My lawyer will send over the contract, but once you sign, Ava, there's no turning back. She wanted to scream, to tell him she never betrayed him, that she loved him even when she left. But what good would the truth do now, with Victoria still lurking like a ghost in his shadow? You don't know anything, she whispered. Then she picked up the pen. The ink bled onto the page like a wound she knew would never fully heal. When she slid the contract across the desk, her hands were steady. It's done, she said. Are you satisfied? Logan scanned the pages without looking at her. Then, a faint, bitter smirk. Welcome to hell, Ava. By the time she arrived at his penthouse that night, the sun had dipped below the skyline. The space was breathtaking. Marble floors, glass walls, a view that made the stars look reachable. But it felt like a cage. Logan didn't greet her, just gestured toward the end of the hall. Your room's there. Don't disturb me unless necessary. She said nothing, just walked past him. In the quiet of her new room, she finally let herself sit. The air was too still, the walls too quiet. She pressed her hand over her stomach, not from illness, but from a sorrow so deep it felt physical. He had once been everything. Now he was just a man she had made a deal with. And she, Ava Reynolds, was a surgeon who had signed away a piece of her soul. For love, for duty, for survival. Ava lay awake that night, the soft hum of the penthouse's air system barely disguising the silence pressing down on her like an extra blanket. She stared at the ceiling, tracing imaginary cracks that weren't there. Every breath she took felt like a negotiation with herself. One inhale to remember why she was here. One exhale to silence the part of her that still ached for the man in the room down the hall. Logan Whitmore, her once lover, now her contracted husband-to-be, had drawn a line in the sand earlier that afternoon, and she had stepped over it. She thought she had prepared herself for anything, but she hadn't anticipated the cold clarity in his eyes when he laid out his price. 1 year of marriage. A child. A clean, controlled image. It sounded so clinical. So unlike the man she once knew, the man who used to trace poetry into her skin at midnight and kiss her laughter into the morning sun. That man was gone. The next morning, Diana appeared with a packet of legal documents. Like clockwork. Mr. Whitmore requests your full availability this afternoon for a joint press statement, she said, placing the heavy folder on Ava's desk. We'll be releasing the engagement news officially in 48 hours. Ava opened the manila envelope slowly. The papers inside were coldly precise. Bullet-pointed clauses, timelines for fertility treatments, financial provisions, and behavioral expectations. There were even stipulations about joint public appearances and social media protocols. She nearly choked when she saw the schedule for conception planning. The bile rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. This was not about pride anymore. This was war for survival. Her father's condition was worsening by the day, and the hospital board was holding its breath for her next move. She was all they had left, and if she had to become a walking contract to keep it all afloat, so be it. She signed every page with robotic precision. That afternoon, they posed for photos on the rooftop garden of Whitmore Holdings. The media had been discreetly summoned, briefed, and prepped. Logan stood beside her in a charcoal suit, his arm resting lightly at her back like an accessory. She wore a silk blush dress, her hair swept into soft curls. The diamond on her finger was blinding, 3 carats of silent lies. As the cameras flashed, Ava smiled with a stillness that didn't reach her eyes. Logan didn't smile at all. When the press conference ended, he didn't speak to her. Not even when the elevator doors closed and they were finally alone. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and stared straight ahead, as if she were nothing more than a shadow standing beside him. In the days that followed, the preparations moved at lightning speed. Invitations were sent, a venue was secured, stylists swarmed her, and Diana handed her a schedule so full it looked like she'd enlisted in the military. Ava let herself drift through it, like a ghost in a borrowed life. She had faced open-heart surgeries, cracked sternums, pulseless moments. But this theater of performance, left her emptier than any code blue ever had. 3 days before the wedding, Logan summoned her to his study. When she walked in, he was sipping whiskey by the fire, sleeves rolled up, shirt unbuttoned just enough to reveal the tan line at his collar. It was the first time she'd seen him not wrapped in armor. "You're not backing out, are you?" he asked, not looking at her. "No," she said evenly. "I keep my promises." He nodded once, as if that confirmed a fact he never doubted. "I added a clause to the contract," he said, sliding a sheet of paper across the table. "After the wedding, you'll move into my estate in Windermere, more secure, fewer eyes." She scanned the document. "You're moving me to the countryside?" "For the baby," he said simply. "I'm not pregnant yet," she said, almost biting. "Soon, you will be," he replied, his voice a blunt edge. She clenched her jaw. "Do I get a say in how or when?" He took a long sip of whiskey. "You signed the contract, Ava." She wanted to throw something, his glass, the contract, herself. Instead, she stood tall. "You're not the only one with conditions," she said. He turned then, eyes narrowing. "Go on. If I conceive, I will be the one to choose my doctor, my care, and the pace. You do not make medical decisions for me. I am not livestock." His jaw flexed, but he nodded once. "Fine." The night before the wedding, Ava slipped away to her old apartment, untouched since the day she left for good. Dust lined the windowsills, but her memories hung thick in the air. The couch still bore the indents of long-forgotten movie nights. The bathroom mirror still held faint traces of lipstick she never fully wiped away. In her bedroom drawer, she found the locket Logan had given her during residency, a tiny heart engraved with her initials and his, entwined. She held it tightly for a moment, then placed it back and closed the drawer. She wasn't that girl anymore. The ceremony was held in a private garden in upstate New York, attended by executives, shareholders, and just enough photographers to make it look spontaneous. Ava walked down the aisle alone, no father to give her away, just the ghost of duty pushing her forward. Logan waited at the altar, stone-faced. When she reached him, he didn't say anything. Just reached for her hand and placed a ring on her finger like he was closing a deal. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said. They didn't kiss. Instead, Logan turned to the crowd and offered a small, tight-lipped smile. Ava followed his lead. At the reception, she danced once, mechanically. Logan spoke to shareholders while she answered polite questions about their love story with a well-practiced smile. Every word she spoke felt like another thread unraveling inside her. When the last guest left and the silence settled again, Logan approached her at the edge of the balcony overlooking the gardens. "You looked beautiful," he said, almost absently. She turned to him. He didn't have to say that. He met her gaze, something flickering in his eyes. "I know." Then he turned and walked away. Their wedding night passed without intimacy. He didn't knock on her door. She didn't wait up. She curled into bed in her assigned suite at the Windermere estate and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally dragged her under. Weeks passed. Their lives moved like parallel trains on separate tracks, coexisting, never intersecting. Ava resumed limited hospital work, quietly taking shifts under an alias at a nearby clinic. Logan immersed himself in meetings, travel, and damage control. He left early, came home late. They barely spoke unless required. Then, one rainy Thursday, she came home late from the clinic, soaked and shivering. When she walked into the kitchen, Logan was there. No suit, just a black sweater, sleeves pushed up and bare feet on the cool marble floor. He looked up. "Where have you been?" "Working," she said simply, brushing water from her coat. "You knew I was on shift," he nodded slowly. "You didn't call." "You're not my keeper." Silence stretched. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "Did you save someone today?" She blinked. "A boy. 8. Heart murmur with late-stage infection. We caught it in time. He'll make it." Logan stared at her, something softening. "I used to love hearing your stories," he said. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she nodded once and walked past him, unsure if what she saw in his eyes was memory or regret. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the thought that for the first time in weeks, his voice had sounded human again. Not like a CEO, not like a stranger, but like the man who once traced her heartbeat and called it his favorite song. The coldness between them wasn't immediate. It crept in like fog through cracked windows, slow, silent, invasive. Every morning in the Windmere estate, Ava moved through routines with clinical precision. She prepared her own breakfast, reviewed hospital files in her sun-drenched study, took long walks through the orchard trails. There was peace in the stillness, but it was hollow, like standing in the center of a snow globe, beautiful and utterly artificial. Logan was always there, but never present. He stayed in his wing of the estate, buried in endless virtual meetings and business calls. Occasionally they passed in the halls like ghosts in the same dream. He'd nod once, she'd answer with a blink. Sometimes he asked if she needed anything. She always said no. Then one afternoon, everything cracked, just a little. It had been a particularly long shift at the clinic. A 7-year-old girl with a congenital heart tumor had been rushed in. Cyanotic, shallow breathing, her parents sobbing in the waiting room. Ava had scrubbed in without thinking, leading the procedure like a symphony conductor in combat boots. The tumor had wrapped around the pulmonary artery, dangerously close to rupture. But after 4 hours, the girl had lived. Her heart had beaten on its own. Her eyes had fluttered open. She had whispered thank you with a breath that barely touched air. Ava returned to the estate, bone-tired, emotionally wrung out, but filled with a kind of quiet joy that only came after pulling someone back from the edge. She kicked off her shoes in the foyer, rainwater clinging to the cuffs of her scrubs, and made her way to the kitchen. The house was oddly quiet, no sounds of clicking keyboards or hushed calls from Logan's wing. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, grounding herself. Then his voice broke the silence. "How was surgery today?" Ava nearly dropped her glass. Logan stood at the edge of the doorway, one hand in his pocket, the other wrapped around a glass of something dark. He looked tired, softer somehow. The stiffness in his shoulders seemed undone. She hesitated, unsure how much to share. "A 7-year-old girl," she said finally, voice low. "Tumor on her heart. It was complicated, but we saved her." For a moment, Logan said nothing. Then he moved further into the kitchen and poured another drink. "You always did love a challenge." Ava took a sip of her water. "I love giving people a second chance." He looked up at that. Just a flick of his eyes. And something passed between them, wordless, unfinished. Without asking, he reached for a bottle of red wine and poured a glass. Then another. He handed one to her. "Drink with me?" She hesitated, her fingers brushing the stem of the glass as she took it. He wasn't issuing a command. It didn't sound like an obligation, just a man, quietly asking. They moved to the sitting room, the one neither of them used, and sat in opposite chairs. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, humming like a distant memory. Ava sipped slowly, letting the warmth settle into her. "You remember this music?" Logan asked. She nodded. "You used to put it on when you cooked, back when you thought spaghetti was gourmet." A faint smile touched his lips. "I burned water the first time I tried to impress you." "I remember," she said, and for the first time in months, she smiled. Silence followed, but not an uncomfortable one. A soft, breathing pause. Then Logan stood and walked out of the room. She didn't follow. Minutes later, he returned, holding something wrapped in old leather. He held it out to her. She unwrapped it carefully. Her heart stuttered. It was her old anatomy notebook, worn and scribbled, full of messy cardiac diagrams, notes in ink, and coffee stains, her handwriting on every page. I found it when I moved out of our old place, Logan said. I kept it. I don't know why. Her hands trembled slightly as she ran her fingers across the pages. You weren't supposed to have this. I didn't know if I should throw it away, he admitted. Part of me hoped you'd come back for it. She looked up at him, and for a split second, the years between them vanished. She saw the boy who used to wait for her after surgeries with takeout and a movie. The one who carried flashcards in his wallet so he could quiz her while she studied. Logan, she whispered. His voice cracked. Why did you leave me, Ava? Her throat closed. She couldn't speak. The truth so sharp, so unbearable, pressed against her ribs. She didn't answer. She just looked into his eyes and saw the same hurt, the same confusion that had haunted her for half a decade. And then, like a current too strong to fight, Logan reached out and brushed her cheek. His touch was warm, real, far gentler than the last time they had stood this close. And she didn't pull away. Their kiss was slow, aching, heavy with memory. It wasn't passion, it was pain. A connection stitched together by longing and questions and the desperate need to feel something human. That night, they didn't speak. They moved in sync, familiar in rhythm and breath, rediscovering each other in shadows and silence. There was no contract between them in those hours, no timelines or boardrooms or legal clauses. Just skin. Just memory. Just what was left after 5 years of brokenness. When Ava woke the next morning, sunlight streaked through the curtains. The bed beside her was empty. A folded note sat on the pillow. She unfolded it with shaking hands. Don't confuse this. It's part of the contract. She read it again and again. The words didn't change. She sat in the middle of the bed, heart hollow. The walls of the estate felt closer now, as if closing in. She pulled the sheets tighter around her body, suddenly chilled despite the morning sun. She had thought, foolishly, that something real had cracked through last night. That somewhere deep beneath the cold exterior, the man she loved had surfaced. But no, it had been an obligation. A clause fulfilled. An execution of terms. Over the next few days, Ava buried herself in work. Long shifts, complicated surgeries, late nights. She didn't speak to Logan unless necessary, and he didn't ask. Their interactions were clinical, brief, and distant. But her body began to whisper truths she could no longer ignore. It started with fatigue, the kind that didn't disappear after 8 hours of sleep. Then came the nausea, sharp and sudden, especially in the mornings. Her appetite disappeared. Coffee, her usual source of salvation, suddenly made her stomach churn. One evening, in the sterile brightness of her office at the clinic, she opened the cabinet drawer and stared at the unopened pregnancy test. She sat there, unmoving, for 10 minutes before she finally took it into the bathroom. 2 pink lines. Bold. Clear. Unmistakable. Ava leaned back against the wall and slid to the floor. Her hands rested on her abdomen, flat and unremarkable. But something inside her had already changed. She was pregnant. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat there, letting the weight of it all wash over her. As a doctor, she understood the biology, the statistics, the science. But as a woman, as a mother, her heart stirred with something far more profound. This wasn't just a clause. This was a life. Hers. And no one, no contract, no boardroom, no Logan would define how she cared for it. She told no one. She quietly adjusted her diet, took supplements, tracked her vitals, designed her own prenatal plan. Every scan, every blood test, every symptom, she documented it meticulously. She treated herself the way she'd treat any high-risk patient, with care, with vigilance, with absolute responsibility. But she didn't tell Logan, not yet, not until she was ready. Because this time, the decision wasn't his, it was hers. Ava had always been good at secrets, in surgery, in relationships, in the quiet management of grief. It was how she survived her mother's death, how she protected her father's crumbling hospital, how she walked away from Logan Whitmore without a word 5 years ago. But now, with 2 tiny lives growing inside her, her secret wasn't a shield. It was a storm, silent, building, and utterly hers. She went about her days like nothing had changed. She completed her shifts at the clinic, took her vitamins in silence, and hid her nausea behind cups of chamomile tea. Logan didn't notice, or if he did, he said nothing. He had reverted to his usual rhythm. Early meetings, late dinners, brief nods in passing. Sometimes she caught him staring when he thought she wasn't looking, but those moments dissolved the second their eyes met. At night, Ava would lie in bed with her hands on her stomach, feeling the faintest flutters beneath her skin. She didn't need to hear a heartbeat to know they were there. Two tiny flickers of life, unplanned but not unwanted. Never that. She had made a choice the moment she saw those two pink lines. This child, or children, as she would later learn, would be hers, not just in biology, but in responsibility. She wouldn't let them be born into a world of contracts and silent wars. She wouldn't let them become pawns. She had no intention of telling Logan until she was ready. But Logan, in his usual fashion, was 2 steps ahead. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Ava returned from a surgical consult to find an envelope sitting neatly on the kitchen counter. Her name was scrawled in clean, efficient handwriting. Inside, a single card. Dr. Marisol Grant will be arriving at your office tomorrow afternoon. Please make yourself available. L. Her hands trembled as she read the name again. Marisol Grant was one of the most elite obstetricians in the country. Private, discreet, untouchable unless your last name belonged in the Fortune 100. Ava hadn't requested her, hadn't spoken a word. And yet, Logan knew. Her chest tightened. She tossed the card aside and stormed down the hallway, ignoring the cold marble under her bare feet, her fingers curling into fists. She found him in his home office, typing something on his tablet with surgical focus. "You don't get to control this," she snapped from the doorway. Logan looked up, blinking slowly. "Good afternoon to you too. Did you hire an obstetrician without asking me?" "I hired a professional to ensure the health of my child." She froze, the words sliced sharper than any scalpel. "Your child?" she repeated, voice low. "Our child," he corrected. "Don't twist my meaning." "You had no right," she said, stepping fully into the room. "I'm a board-certified surgeon. I am perfectly capable of caring for myself and this pregnancy." "I don't question your skill," Logan said, setting his tablet down, his voice maddeningly calm. "But I don't take risks." She stared at him, stunned. "Risks? I've already lost too much," he said. "I won't lose this." Ava's breath caught in her throat. "He didn't say you. He said this." Like the pregnancy was a project, a strategic asset, and suddenly the air in the room felt too tight. "This is not just about the baby," she said slowly. "It's about me, my body, my autonomy." Logan met her gaze evenly. "It's about both of you, and I will do what I must to protect you." "But not trust me?" "I can't afford to," he replied. Ava felt the floor tilt under her feet. She had signed the contract to save lives. She hadn't signed up to be managed like a liability. She left without another word. The next morning, she skipped the appointment. Marisol Grant showed up at the clinic, perfectly punctual and perfectly unnecessary. Ava sent her away with a polite lie and a firm handshake. Later that night, as the rain lashed against the windows of the Windmere estate, Ava curled up in the oversized reading room, a place that once offered comfort and now felt like a cage dressed in mahogany and cream. Her fingers traced the rim of her orange juice glass, the condensation pooling beneath her palm. She dialed Naomi. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she murmured. Naomi didn't ask where she was. She knew better. "Is it the pregnancy?" "It's everything," Ava said. "The way he looks at me like I'm an investment, like I'm just a vessel." Naomi exhaled sharply. "Ava, you didn't tell him the truth, did you?" Ava was silent. "You need to," Naomi continued. "You need to tell him why you left, what Victoria did. He still thinks." "I can't," Ava interrupted, voice shaking. "You don't understand. Back then, his mother came to my apartment. She had files, documents, debt records, proof that if I didn't walk away, she would bury my father, revoke my license, destroy the clinic. I tried, Naomi. I wrote him a letter, left it in his mailbox, but she took it. She burned it in front of me." "Oh my God," Naomi breathed. Ava nodded slowly, tears finally falling. "He doesn't know," she whispered. "He thinks I abandoned him, that I just disappeared. And you let him believe it? I had no choice." But what Ava didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that just outside the curved doorway of the reading room, Logan stood frozen. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He had come to remind her of her checkup that afternoon, but her voice had stopped him cold. Her words had struck like lightning. She left because she was threatened. She tried to explain. The letter was taken, burned. All this time, he had believed she chose to leave, that she had walked away from him without a backward glance. And it had been a lie. He turned away from the door slowly, as if afraid that even his breath might give him away. His chest felt like a minefield, shrapnel made of regret and disbelief. He walked quickly, needing space, needing air. His fingers shook as he pulled out his phone and booked the next flight to Manhattan. Victoria was going to answer for this. The following afternoon, Logan stood in the center of his mother's penthouse. Glass, gold, and echoes of a childhood he no longer trusted. Victoria Whitmore sipped red wine in a velvet armchair, perfectly composed. "Julian," she greeted, using the name only she called him. "This is unexpected." He didn't sit. "Did you threaten Ava 5 years ago?" Her brow arched elegantly. "Excuse me? You took the letter," he said, voice shaking. "You burned it. You told her you'd ruin her father." Victoria gave a short, humorless laugh. A mother does what she must to protect her son. He stepped back like she had slapped him. "I loved her," he said, voice cracking. "She was beneath you. She was everything," he said, eyes burning. "And you destroyed it. She was going to ruin you," Victoria replied coldly. "That clinic was bleeding. Your name would have been dragged into the mess." "You didn't protect me," Logan said. "You controlled me." She stood then, glass dangling from her fingers. "Love is weakness, Julian. You're a Whitmore. We don't beg." He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. A woman so obsessed with legacy she had torn her son's life apart to preserve a name. "I'll never forgive you," he whispered, and he left. Back in Windermere, Ava sat in the nursery she had started assembling, quietly, privately. She ran her hand over a tiny knit onesie, feeling the weight of the future on her chest. She hadn't spoken to Logan since the night of the confrontation. But she knew something had shifted. She didn't know that miles away in a rain-soaked city, Logan Whitmore had finally learned the truth. And that now, for the first time in 5 years, he was no longer at war with her. He was ready to go to war for her. 2 weeks had passed since Logan stormed out of his mother's penthouse, his chest hollow with the aftermath of betrayal. Ava hadn't spoken to him since the night he overheard her confession. She didn't know he had learned the truth. She didn't know the silence between them had shifted from indifference to regret, from distance to reckoning. But Logan knew, and the weight of it was unbearable. He had spent 5 years painting Ava as the villain in his mind, a woman who had walked away, who had left him drowning in the wreckage of what they'd built. But the truth? The truth shattered everything. She hadn't left because she didn't love him. She left because she had no choice. Because his mother had used power like a scalpel to cut out the one piece of his life that had ever felt real. And he had let her. Now, that guilt lived in his bones. In the days that followed, Logan withdrew from everything. Meetings were rescheduled, phone calls ignored. The board grew restless again, but he didn't care. He had spent so many years defending the empire he'd built, maintaining control, preserving image. But for what? What did it matter if the foundation was rotting? He couldn't undo the past, but he could carve a path forward. So he began. Quietly. Methodically. He reopened the financial files on Reynolds Heart Institute, dug through every paper trail his mother had left behind. He discovered forged documents, back-channel threats, and a hidden account used to pay off one of the hospital's creditors. Just enough to create dependency, just enough to gain leverage. It made him sick. He commissioned an independent legal team to begin proceedings to expose the truth if needed. No press, no spectacle, just repair. Then he did something harder. He watched Ava. From afar. He kept his distance, but he noticed the subtle changes, how her hand rested protectively on her belly now, how her gait had slowed, how her eyes looked softer and warier. She no longer looked like the woman who had walked into his office demanding a business deal. She looked like a mother. Like the woman he had once known beneath every layer of armor and silence. He wanted to go to her, to tell her everything. But he didn't. Not yet. Because wanting forgiveness wasn't the same as earning it. And then came the storm. It had started as a gentle snowfall, light flakes dusting the trees around the Windermere estate. Ava had worked late that evening, a complicated surgery followed by back-to-back consults. By the time she stepped outside the clinic, the flurries had thickened into a blizzard, the wind howling against the hospital windows like a warning. She barely made it to the elevator when the pain hit. Sharp. Crippling. Her knees buckled. She braced herself against the wall, her breath shallow, her vision blurring. A nurse spotted her just in time. "My water just broke," Ava gasped. "It's too early." The hospital scrambled into action. Labor had begun at 35 weeks, and her blood pressure was climbing rapidly. Dr. Naomi, who had been monitoring Ava's pregnancy in secret, was immediately called to lead the delivery. "She's carrying twins," Naomi barked at the team. "History of hypertension, alert NICU, prep for possible transfusion." Meanwhile, back at the estate, Logan's phone rang. He answered on the first ring. "It's Ava," Naomi said. "She's in labor, and she's hemorrhaging." The words didn't register at first. Then they hit like a fist. He dropped everything, drove through the blizzard, tires skidding over icy roads, headlights slicing through the snow like a desperate prayer. Time stretched and twisted with every turn. The world had narrowed to one singular need: get to her. When he arrived at the hospital, the emergency room was chaos. Nurses ran with equipment. Doctors shouted instructions. Logan pushed past them all, ignoring the protestations. He found the delivery room by instinct, drawn by panic and love, and something more primal than either. Ava lay on the table, pale and motionless, her gown soaked in blood. Machines screamed. Logan dropped to his knees beside her, grabbed her cold hand with both of his. "Stay with me," he choked. "Ava, don't you dare leave me." Her eyes fluttered weakly. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "I was wrong," he whispered. "So wrong. I should have protected you. I should have believed you. I love you. I never stopped." And then, the cries, one, then another, 2 baby girls. But Logan didn't look at them. His eyes stayed locked on Ava's face, willing her to breathe, to blink, to move. "Please," he whispered, "you're everything. Don't go now. Not now." Moments later, Naomi stepped forward, a firm hand on his shoulder. "We've stabilized her. She's going to make it." He exhaled, a sound that cracked and broke somewhere deep in his chest. He stood back, finally looking at the tiny lives that had entered the world. One lay beneath a warming lamp, arms flailing, her cry fierce. The other was quieter, blinking up at the light with wide, solemn eyes. Sophie and Clara. The names Ava had once whispered to herself late at night, dreaming of what could be. They were perfect. He didn't hold them, not yet. He simply watched, memorizing every inch. 10 fingers, 10 toes, impossibly small noses. His daughters. But it was Ava who drew him like gravity. For the next 2 weeks, he never left the hospital. He sat beside her bed, holding her hand, whispering things she couldn't hear. He told her about the notebook he still kept in his desk, about the way the nursery smelled when she arranged the stuffed animals by size, about the night he realized that all the money in the world meant nothing if she wasn't in it. He didn't cry, not until her fingers twitched against his. And then, one morning, sunlight spilled across the sheets like a quiet benediction. Ava stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. Her voice, when it came, was barely a breath. "Logan?" He leaned in, gripping her hand. "I'm here. I've been here." She blinked slowly, absorbing the room, the machines, the fatigue in his eyes, and something inside her softened, but it didn't melt. Not completely, because she remembered everything. And when she was strong enough to speak, she didn't ask questions. She didn't make demands. She simply said, "I need to leave." Logan felt the ground shift again. She turned her gaze to the bassinets, where Sophie and Clara slept, pink-cheeked and serene. "Not because I don't love them, because I do, fiercely. But they can't grow up here, in silence, in contracts, in glass towers." He nodded, though every cell in his body screamed to beg her to stay. "I wrote you a note," she said quietly. "I'll leave it with the nurse's desk. I won't disappear, Logan, but I need to find out who I am, again." He nodded again, unable to speak. 3 days later, in the quiet haze of dawn, a car pulled away from St. Clair's Hospital. Inside sat a woman still healing, 2 newborns wrapped in fleece, and a love not broken, but paused, redefined. And Logan? He stood at the hospital's front doors, the folded letter in his hands, unread for hours because he couldn't bring himself to see the words goodbye. When he finally opened it, her handwriting was steady. "Logan, I kept my promise. Let me go, Ava." He read it once, then again. And when the snow fell softly over his shoulders, he looked out at the horizon and whispered, "Not forever." Autumn in Seattle was soft and forgiving, the kind of season that wrapped the city in mist and golden hues, disguising pain in the quiet rustle of maple leaves and the scent of rain-soaked earth. Ava Reynolds had always loved autumn. Back in college, she used to call it the season of second chances. But now, It was the season of escape. 3 weeks had passed since she left the hospital, since she slipped quietly into the back seat of Naomi's car with nothing but a duffel bag, 2 bundled infants, and a goodbye letter that had nearly torn her in two. She hadn't looked back. Couldn't. She'd changed her name to A.R. Blake and moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment near Green Lake. It wasn't much, but it had windows that caught the morning sun and a fireplace that worked just enough to warm the silence. There was no staff, no security, no glass towers, just the soft squeak of wooden floors and the cooing of twin girls who knew nothing yet of the world's sharp edges. Ava gave herself permission to be small again. She didn't return to medicine. Not yet. The scalpel was replaced by silence, the operating table by a pair of bassinets. She spent her mornings walking Sophie and Clara along the lake trail, wrapped in soft wool blankets, their cheeks pink from the breeze. By afternoon, she would nap when they did, cook simple meals, fold endless laundry. At night, when they finally fell into deep sleep, she would sit in front of the small easel in her living room and paint. She painted with the desperation of someone trying to translate what words could not carry. Her strokes were bold, chaotic, emotional, hands reaching for light, silhouettes braced against storms, the curve of a child's cheek in shadow. She signed her work only with 2 letters. A.R. She never painted faces. Only memory. Naomi checked in regularly but respected the silence. She didn't pry when Ava refused to talk about Logan. She simply brought groceries, held the girls while Ava showered, and left again with a smile that said, "I'm here, but I'll wait." Ava didn't know where Logan was. She hadn't heard from him, hadn't looked. But sometimes when the girls fell asleep, curled against her chest, and the house felt too still, she would close her eyes and wonder, had he read the letter? Had he tried to find her? Did he understand why she had to leave? What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that Logan Whitmore had never stopped searching. In New York, his penthouse was a hollow monument of glass and silence. The nursery sat untouched, its mobile still spinning faintly in the draft. He had read her letter more times than he could count. Every time he imagined a different ending, a different version of himself, one that had been brave enough to chase her sooner, to say the right things before it was too late. He resigned from Whitmore Holdings. The board was stunned, investors panicked. His mother predictably raged. But Logan was done living under a name that had cost him everything. He sold his stake quietly, kept a fraction of the money, and disappeared from the public eye. No headlines, no farewell speech, just absence. He moved to Portland first, then drifted through the Pacific Northwest, following whispers. A woman with twins renting under a different name, a gallery submission signed AR, a mural in a small town that looked too much like the inside of his heart. And then, one crisp November afternoon, he walked into a local gallery tucked between a bookstore and a coffee shop in downtown Seattle. He hadn't been expecting anything, just passing time, until he saw it. The painting, a woman's hand reaching toward 2 smaller ones framed by falling snow. The brushwork was raw, unmistakable, her style, her soul, and in the bottom corner, small but clear, AR. He didn't breathe, didn't speak. He booked a small apartment a few blocks away the next morning. He didn't knock on her door, didn't show up with flowers or declarations. He simply existed nearby, quietly, carefully, as if proximity alone might undo the damage time had wrought. Ava noticed him first in the park, a tall figure in a dark coat, sitting near the lake, feeding ducks. At first, she thought it was her mind playing tricks, but then she saw him again, at the bakery, at the bookstore, on a bench by the playground, watching her daughters without stepping closer. She didn't approach, but she didn't run either, because something about the way he moved, the gentleness in his posture, the way he looked at Sophie when she squealed or Clara when she yawned, told her this wasn't the man she had left behind. This man was quieter, unshaven, unpolished, human. He never called out to her, never forced a moment. He simply lived his days in orbit around theirs, always far enough not to frighten her but close enough to be felt. And Ava, despite herself, began to watch back. She saw how he bent to tie a stranger's child's shoe, how he spent an hour talking to the elderly bookseller on the corner, how he walked to the co-op every Wednesday morning, rain or shine, to carry bags for a woman who limped with a cane. He was trying, not to win her, but to change himself. Then, one night, after a gallery showing that left her exhausted and chilled, Ava stepped out into the alley behind the building, her arms wrapped tightly around a folder of new sketches. The wind bit at her skin. She shivered once. And there he was. Logan stood at the far end of the alley, leaning against the stone wall like he belonged to it. In one hand, a thermos of soup. In the other, a folded gray coat. Her coat. The one she'd left in his car the day she moved out of Windmere. "You always forget to dress warm," he said softly, no edge in his voice. Ava stopped, her breath caught. She didn't ask why he was there. She didn't ask how long he'd been waiting. She just stepped forward slowly and took the coat. Their fingers brushed. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know if you'd eaten," he said, offering the thermos. "It's just vegetable, but it's warm." She took it. The metal warm against her palms, the kindness even warmer. They stood there for a moment, the world hushed around them. Then she unlocked the side door of the gallery and held it open. "If you're not busy," she said quietly, "would you like some tea?" Logan didn't smile, not with his lips, but something lit in his eyes. "I'm free," he said. Inside, the lights were low and soft. The twins were already asleep. Ava placed the soup on the table and disappeared briefly to check on them. When she returned, he was still standing exactly where she'd left him, coat in his arms, not touching anything, not presuming anything. She poured the tea. They sat across from each other. No questions, no promises, just presence. Later that night, after he had left, she found a small note on the kitchen table. Folded, simple, his handwriting familiar. "Thank you for letting me stay." She read it once, then again. No demands, no apologies, just gratitude. And it was that simplicity that undid her. The next day, Ava went through her routine like always. Diaper changes, feedings, a short walk to the lake. But everything felt different. Lighter, less haunted. That evening, when the girls had been fed and tucked in, Ava stood before the mirror in her bedroom. She looked at herself. Not just the tired circles under her eyes or the faint scar from her C-section, but the woman in full. She was not broken. She was not hiding. She was Ava Reynolds, a mother, a surgeon, an artist, and tonight she wanted to choose. She picked up her phone, scrolled past Naomi, past old colleagues until she found his number. She called. When Logan answered, there was a pause, one heartbeat, maybe two. "Ava?" She smiled, just a little. "Are you free tomorrow night?" she asked. "I want you to have dinner with us." Not because she owed him anything, not because of the past, but because, for the first time since leaving, she was ready to share her present. The next evening, the air in Ava's small apartment buzzed with something unfamiliar. Anticipation. It wasn't the kind that made her anxious or uncertain. No, this was softer, like the delicate flutter before a first snowfall, or the quiet hum of a song she hadn't heard in years but somehow still knew by heart. She moved through her kitchen with a quiet grace, chopping vegetables for a stew, pausing now and then to check the timer on the oven. Sophie was on a playmat near the table, giggling at the jingling keys Ava had tied to a string. Clara, as usual, was content in her bassinet, her eyes heavy but awake, already watching the world with a quiet intensity. Ava wore a simple linen dress, nothing elaborate, but it reminded her of herself. Not the woman from New York, or the surgeon in scrubs, or the contract-bound wife. Just Ava, real and grounded and warm. At exactly 6:30 p.m., there was a knock at the door. She didn't rush to open it. She didn't need to. When she did, Logan stood there, wearing a navy sweater and jeans, holding a small paper bag of sourdough bread and a shy smile. There was no grand gesture, no flowers or wine, no pretense. Just him. "You're on time," she said, lifting one brow. "I tried to be early," he replied, "but Clara spotted me through the window and gave me a look. I figured I'd better wait until the appointed hour." Ava chuckled softly and stepped aside to let him in. He entered quietly, instinctively removing his shoes and scanning the space. His eyes lingered on the twin bassinets, the artwork on the wall, hers, and the faint scent of rosemary and thyme in the air. The apartment was small, but it felt like home. "I brought bread," he said, handing over the bag like it was a peace offering. "And I promise not to burn the soup." Ava smiled as she took it. "Stew's already on. But thank you." Logan crouched by Sophie, who squealed and kicked her feet at the sight of him. She reached up, her tiny fingers curling around his thumb without hesitation. He froze for a second. This still felt new, but then relaxed into it, letting her guide him. Clara let out a soft whimper. Ava crossed the room and lifted her into her arms with practiced ease. She was heavier now, sturdier, a month old and growing fast. When Logan looked up and met Ava's eyes, there was something different in his expression. Reverence. During dinner, they didn't talk about the past, not directly. Logan complimented the stew. Ava teased him about how the girls clearly liked him more than the stuffed giraffe in the corner. They talked about gallery shows and Logan's new apartment, how he'd learned to do his own laundry, and how terrible he was at making oatmeal. "Turns out I need precise measurements," he said, mock grim. "You can't just wing hot cereal." "Who knew?" Ava smirked, sipping her tea. After the dishes were done and the girls were back in their cribs, they sat outside on the small wooden porch. The wind rustled the trees, scattering a few dried leaves across the railing. Logan leaned back against the post, Ava beside him. A thick wool blanket draped across their laps. He didn't speak at first, just looked up at the stars. "I missed this," he said eventually. Ava glanced sideways. "This? Just peace. Real moments. You." She looked down at her hands, now clasped in her lap. "You had peace," she said gently. "You had everything. Power. Control." "I had control," he admitted, "but not peace. That only existed when you were in the room." She didn't say anything. He turned to face her more fully, his voice low. "You didn't just leave a contract, Ava. You left a crater, and it took me a long time to admit I was the one who created it." She turned to him slowly, the porch light casting soft shadows across her face. "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm learning to live in the wreckage," he said. "Not to rebuild what was, but to build something new. With you, if you'll let me." She studied him. Not just his words, but his posture, the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't asking for forgiveness in the way he once would have, expecting it, assuming it. He was offering something simpler, a place to begin. "I'm not the same woman you married," she said quietly. "I don't want her," he replied. "I want you, the real you, the one who paints storms and saves children and sings lullabies at 3 a.m. Ava looked up at the sky, blinking back the sudden burn behind her eyes. "It's not going to be easy." "I'm not asking for easy," Logan said. "Just honest. Just real." She took a deep breath, and then slowly, she reached for his hand beneath the blanket. Their fingers intertwined with a familiarity that didn't need explanation. His grip was warm, steady, but gentle, like he finally understood the weight of her trust. And in that quiet, under the wide-open sky, Ava leaned her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. That night, Logan didn't stay. He kissed Sophie and Clara goodnight, awkwardly sweetly, then told Ava he'd see her soon. Not tomorrow, not every day, just soon. He understood now that she needed space to feel safe, and he would respect that. But each day that followed, he came around a little more, sometimes just to drop off groceries or bring back a painting that had sold at the gallery. Other days to take Sophie on a walk while Ava napped with Clara. He never overstayed, never pushed. He just became part of it. Part of the chaos, part of the joy, part of the rebuilding. Neighbors began to notice him. Mrs. Howard from 2B called him the tall one with the quiet eyes. The clerk at the corner market gave him a discount on diapers. Even Naomi, who remained fiercely protective, softened when she saw how Logan would kneel on the floor, forehead to forehead with Sophie, whispering stories about stars. One evening, weeks later, after Ava returned from a gallery exhibition that had drained her completely, she found Logan in the living room, wearing a bib over his shirt, holding a spoon, and looking utterly defeated. "Clara won't eat unless the spoon does a dance," he muttered, then looked at Ava helplessly. "I don't know the spoon dance." Ava burst out laughing, full, free, belly-deep laughter, and Logan, surprised at first, began laughing too. In that moment, as porridge dripped down his sleeve and Clara squealed with joy, Ava realized she wasn't waiting anymore. She wasn't testing him. She wasn't protecting herself from him. Because this man, with baby food on his sweater and a song about broccoli in his head, was no longer the cold CEO who had traded her for reputation. He was a father, a partner, a man trying. That night, after the girls were asleep and the dishes were done, they sat on the porch again. The stars looked the same, but something was different. Ava turned to him. "Logan," she said softly, "if you want to stay, I won't ask you to leave." He didn't answer with words. He just took her hand again, held it tight, and this time she didn't let go. Winter passed quietly, dusting Seattle with silver frost and muffled stillness. The world slowed down. Pedestrians huddled in scarves, windows glowed amber at dusk, and mornings were often met with the hiss of a kettle and the soft creak of old wood floors. Ava's apartment, though modest, felt more like home with each passing day. And not just because of the photos slowly populating the hallway or the shelves filling with storybooks and mismatched socks. It was because of the presence she no longer feared, Logan's. He never moved in. He never asked to. But he stayed, in the truest sense of the word. He was there at sunrise when Clara woke up fussy and Ava's head pounded from a sleepless night. He was there on Sunday afternoons when she painted and needed someone to rock Sophie in slow, rhythmic steps across the living room. He was there in the silence between routines, in the smiles exchanged over shared coffee, in the soft touches and deeper glances that gradually became a new language between them. One morning, Ava woke earlier than usual. The soft haze of pre-dawn spilled through the curtains, casting golden slivers on the hardwood floor. Logan had already left. He often did that quietly before the girls stirred. But on the kitchen table, beneath a folded napkin, was a note written in his familiar, careful hand. "Thank you for letting me stay. L." She ran her fingers over the ink. There was no expectation in the message, no plea for more, just gratitude. And that, somehow, moved her more than any declaration could. Later that afternoon, Ava found herself distracted. While feeding Clara, she replayed the way Logan had gently cradled Sophie the night before, singing a lullaby off-key but so tenderly it made her chest tighten. It wasn't just that he was helping her. He was learning, growing into the man he might have been all along, if life had given them a clearer path the first time. That evening, after both girls had fallen asleep to the rhythm of lullabies and nightlights, Ava stood before her mirror. She studied her reflection, the softness in her features, the steadiness in her gaze. Gone was the woman who had once hidden behind polished control and silent endurance. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living, as a mother, as a woman, as someone free to choose. And tonight, she wanted to choose. She picked up her phone. Her hands didn't shake. When Logan answered, his voice was calm but surprised. "Ava? Are you free tomorrow?" she asked. A pause. "For dinner. With me. With the girls." There was no hesitation in his answer. "I'd be honored." The next day was calm, crisp. The sky was a rare blue for a Seattle winter. Ava walked with the twins to the co-op market, picking up fresh herbs and a loaf of cranberry walnut bread. She passed familiar shops, exchanging smiles with neighbors who now knew her as the soft-spoken woman with the twins and the paint-stained hands. That evening, she cooked slowly, music playing low in the background. Sophie babbled in her bouncer. Clara napped in a sunbeam that filtered through the window. And the whole apartment smelled like rosemary and garlic. Logan arrived just as Ava was lighting a single candle on the table. He wore a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled, and brought nothing but himself. "I didn't want to assume what wine to bring," he said, stepping inside. "So I didn't bring any." She smiled. "We have apple cider. That work?" He nodded. "Perfect." Dinner was easy, honest. No performance, no pressure. They talked about how Sophie had started rolling onto her side and how Clara was fascinated with shadows. Ava told him about a gallery owner interested in her latest series. Logan told her how he'd started working part-time for a nonprofit helping small hospitals modernize their digital infrastructure. "Doesn't pay much," he said, grinning sheepishly, "but it feels good." She looked at him over her mug of cider. "You look lighter." He tilted his head. "Lighter, happier, like yourself." "Maybe I finally am." After dinner, Logan offered to do the dishes. Ava leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching him fumble with soap and laugh when he dropped a plate and caught it at the last second. "You're terrible at this," she said, smirking. "I'm trying," he replied, soap bubbles on his wrist. "Do I get points for effort?" She laughed. "You get everything for effort." Later that night, when the girls were asleep and the kitchen had returned to silence, they sat on the couch with steaming mugs of tea between them. The candle had burned low, flickering in rhythm with Ava's heartbeat. Logan turned to her, eyes clear. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "If you could do it all again, would you change anything?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'd write the letter again, but I'd find a way to make sure you saw it." His expression softened. I wish I had fought harder, asked more questions. I wish I'd believed you could handle the truth, she whispered. But we're not those people anymore. He looked down at her hand resting on the couch. Slowly he placed his over hers. No, he said, we're not. Silence settled between them like snowfall. Then he added, I'd like to stay. Not just visit, not just linger, stay. Ava looked up at him. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation. She leaned her head against his shoulder and said softly, then stay. Spring bloomed quietly, like a secret unfolding in plain sight. The cherry blossoms arrived early that year, painting the sidewalks in soft pinks and whites. Ava's apartment remained their home base, but Logan had gradually, naturally become a fixture within its walls. Not an intruder, not a guest, just a presence that belonged. They shared breakfasts and burp cloths, paint-stained evenings and sleepless nights. Logan learned how to braid tiny wisps of Clara's hair and how to make Sophie laugh with a ridiculous rendition of Old MacDonald. There were still hard days, exhaustion, teething, the occasional shadow from a past that hadn't fully faded. But those moments no longer held the power to break them, because now everything was built on choice. Mutual, conscious, deliberate choice. One morning, Ava sat on the porch with a canvas in front of her and both girls napping inside. Logan emerged with 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside her. What are you painting today? He asked. She smiled. Hope. He nodded, not needing more than that. Later that day, while watching the girls play on a picnic blanket in the grass, Logan turned to her. I know we've done everything backwards, he said. But I'd still like to do one thing right. She looked at him, amused. What's that? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. No spotlight, no speech, just a ring. Simple, beautiful, familiar. Her breath caught. I don't need vows or contracts, he said quietly. I just need you to know I'm not leaving again. Not ever. Ava didn't cry. She didn't even speak at first. She took the ring, slipped it on, then she whispered, okay. And that was enough. Years later, long after the girls had grown out of cribs and into bicycles, long after Ava had returned to medicine part-time, and Logan had started a foundation in their daughters' names, they sat on the same porch, older, maybe a little more wrinkled, but stronger for it. Sophie chased fireflies. Clara read a book under the porch light. Ava leaned against Logan's side and said, You know what I'm most grateful for? What? That we didn't find our way back because we had to, but because we chose to. He kissed the top of her head. Every day, I still do. And in that moment, there was no ending, just the gentle hum of life, imperfect, precious, and finally, theirs. Life lesson from Ava and Logan's story. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive in perfect packaging or follow a flawless path. Ava and Logan's story reminds us that real love, lasting love, isn't always about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about the courage to grow, the humility to admit our mistakes, and the willingness to rebuild something fragile with care and intention. Ava walked away to protect what mattered most, even at the cost of her own happiness. Logan, blinded by pride and grief, let her go without searching for the truth. But in the end, it wasn't fate that brought them back together. It was choice, one decision at a time. We learn that healing isn't linear, forgiveness isn't instant, and trust, once broken, can only be restored through consistent effort, honesty, and respect. The past will always leave a mark, but it doesn't have to define the future. When we choose to listen more, control less, and love without conditions, we allow space for something truly beautiful to grow. Ava and Logan didn't find their way back because they were forced to. They did it because they chose to, again and again. Not through obligation, but through love, as quiet and real as morning light. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We love seeing our global family. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more moving stories every week. Your support means the world to us.